Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ivo van Breukelen. We really welcome you at this session at the end of the conference. So thank you so much for joining. I'll do a short introduction and then I hand it over to my colleagues here on the stage. So my name is Ivo. I'm the co-founder and partner at the Proptech Connection. We are a global strategic PropTech advisory headquartered in Sydney, Australia, and offices in Chicago, Amsterdam, and Thailand. And what we effectively do is act as a bridge between the different actors in the ecosystem. So we have a broad network on the investor side, on the technology buyer side, and work extensively with the startups, so the PropTechs, and then we bring strategic value in an international context, typically. But yeah, enough about me. Welcome, Deb, all the way from New Zealand. So really appreciate you coming here with us today, and Serene. So Deb, if you wouldn't mind, just a short introduction about yourself and obviously what you guys do at Switch.
Sure. So even though my accent is Australian and I live in New Zealand, our company is Switch Automation and we're headquartered in Denver, Colorado. About 85 people, 4,500 buildings on our platform, and what we do is we collect data out of buildings, we bring that up into the cloud, we make it all normalized, and then we give building owners and operators the tools to be able to do things with their buildings to make them more sustainable. So what we're really interested in is digitization and decarbonisation at scale.
Hi everyone, my name is Serene Almomen. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Senseware, and we're all about getting real-time data from the physical environment, from the built environment, whether it's mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or environmental type data. We process today over 380 million data samples on our platform every day, and we've worked with commercial real estate properties, some large school districts, getting data like real-time energy data, submetering data, and the one up-and-coming type of data set that everyone wants is indoor air quality and environmental type data. So that's about us, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much, both. Before we really dive into the topic, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I think are relevant and what we are at the PTC are seeing in market. I think, needless to say, everybody knows and is very much aware that ESG is a very hot topic and on the front page of everybody's interest. What we have been seeing is some institutional interest out of Saudi Arabia and Japan really looking into the space and wanting to enter. And I think the second observation is that a lot of these investors are now quasi climate funds, right? So they tie their investment thesis into a certain carbon output. What I would like to ask, and obviously understanding real estate, it's all about selling more or easier and just really finding that value. And that maybe to start with you here, what are you seeing in market? Obviously you guys operate globally. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? Can you give us some insights on that, please?
Sure, happy to. So the subject of this talk is sustainability, so I'll always bring it back to that. And sustainability in real estate has actually been a fairly major role within most large companies for at least 15 to 20 years. In Australia, they had mandated disclosure of building ratings from 2010. So we've always seen sustainability in real estate, but it was kind of the softer side of real estate, of the side of sustainability. It was, are we tracking the number of commuter miles that people are doing on bike and bus? And are we transforming our cafeterias to have recycled materials? And a lot around the actual materials in the construction was a lot of the focus. But what we're seeing with the energy crisis, well, climate crisis and energy crisis, both of these things is causing the investors in real estate to take a very strong interest in where their money is flowing. And why they care about that is because the next generation of pension funds is coming in and they care about that. And so what we're seeing is there's this huge pressure coming from the investment community into the real estate community to care about the ESG metrics. And we've never seen that before. So it's one of the huge macro trends that's causing companies that, honestly, we have companies that wouldn't have even known what ESG stood for 3 years ago, now coming to us and saying, what's your ESG strategy? Because we can only engage with you if you've got an ESG strategy. So it's really an interesting kind of macro trend, I think.
I think that's a really good point, and also something that we have actually been seeing is that a lot of these institutional players are not necessarily talking a lot about investments, but much more about deployment, right? So in terms of what technology is out there tomorrow that we can use to optimize some of our processes. Serene, any insights from you? What are you seeing in your day-to-day with clients and some of the pain points that are brought forward?
Yeah, I echo what Deb said. We hear more about ESG than we've ever, maybe in the last couple of years. It's just a recent thing. So definitely seeing that trend and seeing it as a driver to adopt technology in buildings more than before. And I think always when there is investment pressure, the companies start to move. So that's great to see. The other thing we're seeing is this a continuous and increasing conversation around digital transformation. But, in the past, it was just a loose term, cool thing. Everyone talks about, we are in digital transformation. What I'm seeing more is that there is more concrete examples of what that means and what that should result in. What we're seeing is that they're actually adopting technology for the sake of digital transformation to meet sustainability goals, to increase building performance, and to improve tenant experience within the building. So there is a specific reasons behind, why they're looking into digital transformation and including technology, and there is more clarity that we're seeing in the industry around that. And then one final thing, because, we've suddenly started to do a lot of this, which is around the healthy building and including healthy buildings as part of sustainability, and then the conversation for sustainability, and as part of the initiatives to make the building more sustainable, is to make it also a healthy building. So that's another big trend we're finding.
And maybe to allude to that, do you see also a lot of occupiers now demanding it?
We are seeing occupiers that are putting pressure on their rent lease rates and use that as a reason. I think that's more of what we're seeing versus commanding it. It's just as a negotiations tactic, I guess.
Thank you. And Deb, any thoughts on that?
So we're not seeing enough of that. So I thought with COVID, indoor air quality would become the number one thing and that it would be mandatory. I thought it would be like the 9/11 moment for airports where we never got on a plane after a 9/11 without going through security and radar. And I thought COVID would be the one thing that would focus the entire real estate community on indoor air quality and proving that you have good indoor air quality. Because if you're going to get people back to the office, one of the fundamental things you would think that you would need is that. And we all know that COVID is airborne and therefore ventilation. So I think that is a surprising thing that we're not seeing enough of. What we're seeing a lot of globally is the marketing department, the board, the senior management have put some sort of net zero goal out in the public. It's on the website. It's a statement, and that's it. So far it's just a marketing statement. And it's like, okay, we're going to be net zero by 2030, by 2035, whatever it might be. We're going to be carbon positive by 2030. And then, boom, over to the ops team. And the ops teams are scrambling to say, we have to actually do something about that. And it has to be real, because the shareholders will hold us accountable at every single meeting from here on in about what was our progress towards that. And what we're seeing in Europe, and I'm sure you know about both these cases, Deutsche Bank and KLM, both being called out for greenwashing and enormous fines. And so what we're seeing is that you can't just put that statement out there and then do nothing. And so all of a sudden, sustainability now has actual real teeth, and it's going to need hard metrics and proper data to support it.
I think those are really good observations. So thank you for that. And as a Dutchman, I didn't want to allude to KLM. I was bringing up Deutsche Bank, but thank you for that. But what I'm very, very interested in is we predicted earlier this year that a lot of big corporates would actually backwalk some of their ESG commitments, and I think that's something you have already pointed out to. But one of the key challenges that we see in market is that it's oftentimes very challenging to qualify the ROI. So I would be very interested to know from you, what are some of the pain points that you run into when you sit with clients, and also outline that value proposition that you have. And then maybe we'll start with that one, and then I have a follow-up question on that. Maybe, Deb, you want to start?
Yeah, I can go. And I think the challenge is related to your point about indoor air quality, because we also expected that there's a lot more adoption in the commercial real estate. We're seeing that more in schools. I think the stakeholders have higher demands there and more pressure. Parents care, school unions, teacher unions care. And there are also regulations like Maryland and California are requiring CO2 reporting. That is not happening in commercial real estate, so there's lower adoption. And I actually talked to one of our, back to the challenges, because we are seeing that and we're thinking, why is that happening with commercial real estate in terms of monitoring, verifying that all of the new things that they did are working as they should. And I talked to one of our CTOs and one of the large commercial real estate customers that we have. And what he was saying, which resonated with me, is that with commercial real estate, you have adopters, early adopters like them, that start with new technology that they know it was going to be expected in the future. But there is a big lead time between the adopters and the followers in the commercial real estate versus other industries where you have an adopter, you talk about it immediately after you find others that go and follow. So that's the case. And why that is the case with commercial real estate is that when you're adopting new technology, the followers want to see a full life cycle of the value add to that technology, which requires maybe a year or a couple of years of multi-seasons, and then a case study, complete case study of how that actually helped that, organization. And so that just, drags, some of the adoption of new technology. Indoor air quality is one, and that's one challenge that we are facing, with our organization and targeting commercial real estate.
And Deb, what do you see when you sit with clients? Why do people not proceed? What are some of the, really the struggles that you face when you act with potential clients?
So two parts of this. One is what is the ROI, and the other one is what are the hurdles. So in the US, energy is far too cheap and has been forever far too cheap, and water is far too cheap. And so because it's too cheap, there isn't a good enough ROI in energy efficiency to have driven this industry, which is why we haven't seen any kind of major transformation on making buildings more energy efficient, because it didn't cost enough. I mean, we've got a client in the Midwest that last year saved 14 million kilowatt hours of energy at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. It's like, it's barely worth doing. I mean, it's a huge amount of energy that they've saved, but because the energy is so cheap, it's barely worth doing. They actually will get a huge amount of brand advantage out of that. But what we're seeing now with the energy crisis in Europe, and energy prices like not just doubling, tripling, like 5 times, and so all of a sudden energy is not cheap. I'm not sure when that's going to translate into the US market. I would think because it's not deregulated and because there's just such strong systemic, traditional ways of the capital markets working here, I can't imagine the energy prices actually changing enough to change that thing. But what we're seeing is no politician wants to be the person who puts their hand up and says, we don't have enough energy generation, therefore we've got to create a new power station. And so that's why we've got Local Law 97 in New York, because they don't want to build any more power generation. And we know that we can get 50 years of economic growth out of our existing energy markets if we're just more efficient with what we have. So those are the macro drivers, I think, in the US. In terms of the hurdles, I'll be quick. The ROI, if any potential customer says to me, what is the ROI? They're not my customer. My customer will have a portfolio of buildings, and they know that the way they manage buildings today, with people driving around in trucks and manually inspecting equipment and doing quarterly inspections, they know that's not the future. My customer has grown up with iPhones and iPads, and they just are not, they know that there's a bigger ROI than just the energy savings. And so if somebody's quizzing us on what is the ROI, they're not ready to do what we're doing yet.
Understood. And Serene, is there anything you wanted to add on top of that, or what you guys are necessarily seeing? Okay, that's great. I think one final question, Deb, on what you just said, which I think is very interesting. And if I may summarize it, you effectively say that pricing of energy is one of the drivers, and that obviously is a big one in Europe. But I would really like to understand, given what happened in Ukraine, right, and all the effect that it has on the explosion of price effectively across Europe, what have you seen on the business? Do you see a large inbound of folks that now start to realize that they need to do something? Do you see, is it status quo? So just how has that impacted your business?
It's huge. I mean, there isn't a company in our space that's not looking at the UK and Europe as a potential next office. And in fact, we're opening our office in London on Monday. So it's so enormous and such a systemic shift that the European Union knows that they have to get themselves off this, the guarantee of the Russian gas. They just can't do that anymore. So they've got to find ways of making, and buildings are 40% of the world's carbon emissions. So even without the climate crisis, we've got the energy crisis. And so the European Union is making all buildings benchmark by 2024, and they have to have that automated by 2026. So that's an automatic regulatory framework and a driver, a macro driver for what we do. That's what we do. And so we actually have an entire market now that has to have this problem solved within 2 years and automated within 3 years.
Super. Thank you so much. Serene, question for you. I think the $1 million question that everybody here is trying to figure out. So how do we leverage, let's say, green tech to increase value of buildings? One of the things that we're seeing is that effectively in commercial owners are effectively tying in health and ESG into amenities, right? I think we've spoken about that. So what are you seeing in market, and what's your vision on that?
Yeah, it was interesting. So, you know, to me, when I look at, okay, you know, we have two buildings, comparable and type of building, location and whatnot, but one that has, you know, a list of amenities that is more than the others, including things related to technologies around sustainability and energy management systems, smart automation, some indoor air quality technology, monitoring and otherwise. You know, naturally you would think, you know, the value of that building is more than this other one. Just like when you buy a car that has, you know, blind spot detection, it's more expensive than the one that doesn't. So I think from that aspect, you know, adding these types of technologies in building will contribute to the increasing the valuation. But also, it's very interesting. I was talking to Michael Glick, who's was a speaker today at. He works at Walker and Dunlop, and they buy commercial assets. They assess buildings. And evaluate buildings, and he was saying that one of the things that they look at when they value the building is the list of amenities, whatever it is. The one that have more check boxes are valued more than the one that doesn't. And so it clicked in my mind what I'm seeing from my customers. So when we were talking to our customers and selling our technology, whether it's energy monitoring or indoor air quality, they are marketing it as, oh, indoor air quality is an amenity. And this, you know, energy monitoring as an amenity. And now the two click to me, because if, you know, the valuation of the building is tied to the amenities, if they're saying more and more of the things that they are putting in building are amenities, then they are driving that valuation and making it clear that they have more things. So that's one thing. The other thing that's interesting that we're seeing with our commercial real estate clients that I think is novel, new thing that's happening in the industry that ties to the valuation is that specifically with indoor air quality. So a lot of our clients right now, the commercial real estate owner operators, are using indoor air quality in a core and shell fashion, so they're just monitoring the HVAC operation. But then they're looking at moving that into, as an amenity, into the tenant space. And as they move it to the tenant space, they're looking at a pricing model to create revenue streams from that. So the conversations we're having is that, oh, can I set, as an CRE owner, operator, sell, buy from you, sell to the tenant as an amenity with a markup, and I take advantage of that additional revenue stream, or get a referral fee for referring my tenants to using your technology. So that's, again, looking at how to do creative ways to increase the top line revenue, which translates into valuation. So, these are some of the things that I think where technologies, I'm just using IAQ as an example, just easy way to, but anything I think related to sustainability can definitely, tie into increasing valuation, which is, seeing increasingly more.
I think the other thing is right now, commercial office, what we're actually seeing really, if we're all going to be honest, is the whites of people's eyes. The commercial office market is absolutely terrified that people are not coming back to the office. And they are trying to force everybody to think that we have to come back to the office. So you'll see these stories. Elon did one. Goldman Sachs made everyone come back. And right now everybody is in a market where there's no way you can force your people to come back to the office 5 days a week. We just proved for 2.5 years that everybody can work quite adequately at home, sometimes better and more productively without the commute, etc. And so to put this wish out in the public that we want everybody back into the office, yes, of course you want everybody back into the office, but it's not going to happen. So rather than just sitting there bitching and screaming about it, they should be putting in strategies to help people get back into the office. So what Serene's talking about there is, how do we improve the office environment so people do want to come back in? And indoor air quality sounds like an amenity, but it's actually a must-have. It's highly tied in with health and wellness. And I'm not talking about like in a soft, yoga type way. It's absolutely proving to your tenants, your customers, your clients, that you are providing a fit-for-purpose piece of space, but it also is actually a proxy for occupancy. You can actually use CO2 sensors as a proxy for occupancy, and what commercial landlords don't have at the moment is good visibility into how many people are coming back into the office and how are they using that space and which of their clients are going to churn. So I think that's one aspect of it. And then the second really critical aspect of this is all of us are also tenants, and we all have our own ESG metrics, and we expect the landlords to now be sophisticated enough to share with us our environmental footprint, our CO2 levels, our comfort, and because it's actually part of our mandate to report that back as a business owner. And I'm beating our landlords up to say, I expect these metrics and I will pay for them because I want to be B Corp certified, for example. And as we see all of these large companies, like I'm talking about the really big companies who are tenants all around the world, this is not a choice. The landlords are going to have to do that because Deutsche Bank just put a net zero statement in the public. So now everybody has to collect those metrics from every office and feed that back to their head office. So the landlords, I don't think, have really grasped that yet, that this is, one, they have to do it, and two, it's also a business opportunity for a new revenue model.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. We at the PTC also believe that asset repurposing is the biggest challenge and opportunity this upcoming decade for a number of reasons. And to keep it close to Deb's home, I think we looked at the Australian market, where they had pre-COVID, I think 75% occupancy, and in a very favorable projection, they expected 60% of the folks to return, meaning that 50% is basic empty space, right? So there's a very, very significant opportunity, and I think there's also big opportunity, right, from a business standpoint. Maybe coming to the next point, what we also hear a lot of market, and one of the challenges that the industry may face is that there are actually a lot of players out there. I think we've spoken about that, so would really like to understand from both of you, what needs to happen in our space to really get more adoption, right? Because it's on one hand it's legislation, it's pricing, but it's very often very reactive. So what are your views on in terms of how we can scale this and really get a broader mandate and folks excited into the space? Serene, maybe we're starting with you.
Yeah, I can start. I think I mentioned one of the ways which actually came from a customer that knows the industry more maybe than I do, and it's having more and more case studies of what this means, how it's implemented, these technologies, how are they used, what are the benefits that are seen, because people like to hear from their peers, versus the vendor about what, the value of the technology. So I think having more of that out there, which we try our best, and I know you guys do a good job with that. So that's, I think, one way. I think, the education from this tenant side, I've been talking to a lot of the leasing, the brokers that talk to tenants and just picking their brains around, how do we educate the tenant? How do we enable them to actually have in their lease, change the terms, to add and require some technologies, sustainable, show things around the sustainability of the, the space they're occupying and things like that. Yeah, I think those are kind of two things that come to mind, in terms of adoption.
So the competitive landscape in PropTech it's the single largest challenge for people who are setting out on this journey of digitizing their real estate, and they start to Google indoor air quality and they'll come up with 20 companies, and then they have to somehow differentiate between those 20 and try and figure it all out. And so it has been one of the largest, I guess, reasons why people didn't do things. And then the worst thing, and I often accuse the real estate industry that they don't mean to, but they actually kill small companies because they'll do proof of concepts and pilots. So because they don't know enough about what we do, and because they don't have any real big case studies in the market that they can follow, and it's also new, and nobody really wants to take a big bet on anything, and so they'll do 7 trials, proof of concepts, whatever they might call it. And so they don't know that they're doing it, but they're actually killing PropTech companies. And it's why we've seen so much failure in this space, because any PropTech trial is going to take between 18 months and 2 years from the time you engage and sign to implementation, for them to assess it, and then they decide they're going to roll it out at scale. And that actually kills our companies. And so one of the things that we do is we say, sure, you can do a proof of concept. You have to prove that the technology works, but I don't need to prove that. I've got 4,500 buildings on our platform. So if you want to do a trial, that's fine. We're going to charge you 4 times what we would charge you to do a proper project, and we'll just call it stage 1. And so we actually price them into thinking about doing things at scale, and then we offer them slices of the product that are much lower risk, where they can come in easy. And we're actually starting to think about freemium models too, to try and get people in. But this also talks to what I call the great opportunity. There's no universities churning out smart building engineers. There's no universities churning out the professional person who needs the 7 disciplines to digitize a real estate portfolio. You need to know about networking, you need to know about cybersecurity, you need to know about data and data protocols and data ingestion and cloud hosting, and there's all of this thing that you have to know, and most people who are in our space are self-taught. And so that is actually the great opportunity for everybody to realize that this is the biggest wave of our generation. It's the biggest industry growth that we're going to see in our lifetime. And it's an enormous opportunity to which there are absolutely no barriers to anybody to get into, because there isn't a specific education that you need to have. So I think that's the exciting part of it. And what we're seeing is that those people are doing that homework, they are doing that research. And once they have the confidence of working with a company like Senseware or Switch, they do go at scale.
Yeah, I think a really interesting point. One of the reasons why we started the PTC was actually that the Proptech ecosystem is highly fragmented and inefficient. So it's very difficult to actually, navigate the entire ecosystem, not only on a country scale, but in an international scale, it's much more challenging. So I think to your point, in terms of international expansion, we believe that agencies should take a much more prominent role, given that they have that global footprint. But one of the key challenges that we also see, and I think you mentioned that correctly, is that there is quite a large gap primarily between the technology buyer side and the startup side, two different worlds talking to each other, where oftentimes folk on the startup side come in and never have really worked for real estate companies, so don't necessarily always understand their clients. So then there is a very large mismatch, and outlining that value proposition and going through that journey may be much more challenging. So just wanted to point those two things out. Looking at the clock, we have a couple minutes left. I would be very interested, and I think the audience as well, to have a better feel where you believe the market is going, right? So where are we in 5-10 years down the line? One, and second, how can we as an industry solve the problem that you pointed out, where there's a lot of fragmentation, a lot of companies coming in? How do you see, for example, your role as a business to capitalize or leverage that ecosystem? Maybe starting with Serene.
Sure. I'm gonna predict based on what I'm seeing from the big organizations, building technologies in our space, that probably have a team of researchers that are looking into that. And what I'm seeing from them, we work with Siemens, Honeywell, Carrier, and those types of organizations, and they're all, it feels just in the last 18 months, have released their software platform for digital transformation. That's basically a single pane of glass that has different modules, that is a software platform, SaaS type platform for portfolio level access, visibility, analytics, things like that. So Siemens had the Building X, for example. Honeywell released Forge. Carrier released Abound, all that stuff. So I think that there is a big move in the industry around visibility and transparency and knowing about things from anywhere at any time. And I think that's what's driving a lot of these software releases and whatnot. I think that's great, because at some point, that will drive the need for access to the data actually from on-site, and then companies like ours will have, a bigger market and bigger demand for our technology to get data, to do smart automations and things like that. So I think that's a big thing that I think is coming to the future of the built environment.
Super, thank you. Deb, your view on those two items?
So two big predictions. One, we're going to see a lot of consolidation. So we'll see a lot of money coming into this space and consolidating companies like ours so that there's less players in the market, and the money helping companies like ours get bigger faster, because the need is there now. Like 3 years ago, I couldn't have predicted what the macro factors would be to make this market go faster. But and when you think about the climate crisis, what they talk about is in real estate is stranded assets. Now, they're talking about stranded assets because nobody wants to own those assets because they're in a place that's been badly affected by climate crisis. But stranded assets is actually going to mean you didn't upgrade your assets for these things, and so the fines in New York City are like $7 million a year, and so that will become a stranded asset because, one, the landlord doesn't want to spend the money now, and then nobody wants to lease that building, because what happens when, and we saw this in Australia, when you get that mandatory disclosure in, the big companies with the big brands, they don't want to lease a badly performing building. And so the public disclosure of energy benchmarks, you'll get the government and all of the big, the stock exchange top 400 will say, well, we're not going to take a building that's not at a 5-star rating, and then that actually drags the industry up. So some of those assets are going to get stranded because you won't be able to lease them simply because nobody wants to put their name in them. So I think once this thing starts to sort of get a roll on, it's actually going to go much, much faster than what anybody's anticipating.
Super. Well, I would like to round out. We're here at the last minute. I see we got a question coming in. Unfortunately, no time to point it out, but please come forward and Deb, Serene, and I will stay here. So if you have any other questions, we'll hang around a little bit. But that being said, really wanted to thank Serene and Deb for your time and your insights today. And we look forward, obviously, to see how your business has progressed. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for coming.